6:28. Very good morning to you. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Angela.
We're going to take a look at today's front pages and then look at stories in just a moment. But the front pages of the Times warns of a new nightmare for NHS patients as junior doctors take to the picket lines once again.
The Observer uncovers a care home crisis with children sent hundreds of miles away.
The Mail claims that a so-called vegan mob is plotting to sabotage the Grand National.
The Sunday Express has Rishi having 6 months to sort out the boats crisis.
And the Telegraph reports that lockdown children are having to wait a year for NHS help.
The Sunday Mirror remembers Paul O'Grady with the headline, "Have a laugh at my funeral."
While the Sun exposes the married England ace who reportedly forced his lover to sign a gag order.
And this is a story you want to see. Easter bunny and sunnies, says the Daily Star Sunday, as temperatures are set to soar to 24 degrees over the bank holiday weekend. Too good to be true.
Well, yes, and you were saying it like that because you've got to work over the weekend, haven't you?
Yes,
Yes,
yeah.
no, we
still want it to be nice, though.
No, the rest of us will be out sunning ourselves. Don't worry about it. Right, to look through the newspapers now, we've got Emma Wolfe, a journalist and writer, and Alan Miller, who's co-founder of the Together Association. It's so good to have you both on the programme with us this morning. You've been going through the papers, and Emma, you start us off with actually a very serious story on the front page of the Times, isn't it?
Yeah.
Life-changing operations are facing cancellations as the junior doctors strike.
Yeah.
I think everybody was thinking that that was sort of coming to an end, didn't
I think many of us thought that there had been a
Yes.
breakthrough on pay and that we were coming to the end of NHS strikes, but obviously we've got months and months of backlog from industrial action
yes.
across the services, nurses, junior doctors, paramedics, everything. So now there's another wave of strikes coming from junior doctors after the Easter weekend, which is always a sort of backlog time anyway, a 4-day strike starting on the 11th of April, which is going to cause yet more months of cancellations and delays for patients. You know, some of them, I mean, there are stories in the Sunday Times, a 13-year-old facing spinal surgery, which is just being delayed and delayed, you know, parents not knowing whether to get their children ready and prepare them for hospital, whether to start packing, whether to tell them that it's happening, whether it's not. It's a sort of day-to-day cancellation thing as well, where doctors are saying, the organisation is saying, well, don't cancel yet, let's wait and see what we can get through. So it's a really chaotic situation for patients.
What worries me is the sub-headline on this, where it says, walkout made worse by Easter shutdown. Well, don't have an Easter shutdown.
There's going to be a lot of people off over Easter, which, as I say, causes delays anyway.
So don't do it.
Don't do it.
Cancel the... I mean, look, I know it's tough if you work in the industry. Cancel the... Get it... You've got to crack on.
Got to crack on because they've already got a backlog of hundreds of thousands of people, you know, and yes, it's not all critical care, but, you know, if you're an elderly person facing a hip operation that's been repeatedly delayed and delayed, if you're living in pain, or if you're mentally preparing to go in to hospital, which is a big deal for most of us, you know, it really is very disruptive.
And I think, Emma, you know, as well as the stories, I think... Alan, we all know people who are in that position and we all know how devastating it is for them.
Well, we do, and it is, and it's very difficult. I mean, one of the things, it should be said, I'm actually in support of people that want to improve their pay conditions. Sometimes retrieving your labour is the only thing you can do, and it does beg the question, when is the right time to do it? That is a question. I mean, one of the bigger questions is the whole of the NHS and how it's run, efficiency, time waits. We know that we've got an enormous backlog as a consequence of the lockdowns, the consequences COVID-only NHS for 2 years. And we also have a bloated management and consultancy that's very ideologically driven as well, who actually got 2 and 3 times pay rewards, and you know, during this whole period. So I think that there needs to be a taking to task of the whole organisation. It's not a deity, it's not a religious institution. We should think about efficiency and execution and delivering service, but we also need lots of new doctors, and we have an issue with that as well. So from the point of view of training and pay and all of those things, we need to really seriously grab it.
Rip it up and start again.
Do you know, I was about to say that I would love us to go back to what Anara and Bevan did back in the 1940s, start with a blank sheet of paper with the billions that they now have.
You couldn't pour more money in. It isn't the money per se, it's organisation.
Plan it again from scratch with that blank piece of paper, which is exactly what Anara and Bevan did when nobody else in the world had a National Health Service, and look at what is required, not as we did then for the 1940s, 50s and 60s, but what we actually need for the 21st century
can
and
you
beyond.
do that? That's the
well,
thing.
everybody
Can you
tells me you can't, but I would love them to try it. I really would.
Because how do you do the handover? How do you move it from one system to another? I don't know,
but I think that's what's needed. I really do.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, the same goes for every single public service in this country.
Yes.
You would say, you know,
Start
start
again.
again, because look at the mess that we've got ourselves into.
Alan, let's have a look at the Mail on Sunday, should we? What they're calling a vegan mob. I know a few vegans. They're not the mob types, really, but anyway, a vegan mob plots to
One sitting
sabotage
next
the
to
Grand
you.
National. Are you a vegan?
Semi-vegan, yeah.
So semi-vegan.
Yeah, I mean, very, very strict vegetarian.
Oh, well, I'm a strict vegetarian.
Oh, well, there, we got a mob
I
down
do,
this end.
but I do like a bit of cheese. So there you go.
And would you only
We're
have
living
vegetables?
dangerously. Right, well, this story.
throwing you off, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting that we're like, you know,
Yes,
people
watch
make
what you
different
say.
choices. You know, it's very popular actually. Some of these things. But what's interesting about this is a number of things that over 100 activists planning to disrupt the Grand National with similar style to what we've seen recently. Things gluing their hands together, actually stopping the whole race, which has hundreds of millions of viewers, has around the world, is a very popular event across Britain, and they have a signal group and others, but Jim, there was this Jim that contacted the Daily Mail and said, look, we've got this great news, it's a real surprise, we're going to be doing this, and that's how
It's not a surprise anymore, then, is
right,
it?
indeed, and he thought it was going to be, and because I think one of the interesting things about that is that much of the media and certainly much of the establishment have been quite supportive about some of these things, even if they've said, well, we don't really like your specific things that you've done.
That's a good story.
There's been a kind of reticence to implement the measures to stop them. So there's now a discussion about new laws that we're having to try and stop protests, you know, which I think is very problematic. But actually stopping people from doing things, we've got the laws that currently exist. What's interesting about this is that there's a very clear recognition that they think they have the moral high ground to stop something that is very enjoyable by many people on the basis of these harms. And it's been foiled. It's been foiled as a consequence of this. But I do think it speaks to this sense that we've got a situation in Britain where, you know, and I'm a big supporter of protest, legal free protests, to be able to do that. And I don't like the extra legislation that's coming in. I challenge it. But this idea that you can basically just not try and convince and win people with hearts and minds, not trying to explain the merits or the virtues of your arguments and win them over democratically, but just go and spoil things, go and like...
Hold on a minute. And look, I'm not saying I support this, because I actually wouldn't support them doing this. However, say you're a fan of protest and being able to protest, the right to protest. That doesn't win over hearts and minds. Standing outside with a few placards and things, no, it doesn't convince anybody of anything. It's just having your voice heard.
Well, I think that, you know, like everything, a protest is part of an overall view. So at the Together Declaration, for instance, what we do is we encourage people to write and call and visit their MPs and their local councillors. We address the Cabinet and Downing Street. We do letter writing campaigns. We have rallies. We go on marches and we do protests. As a 360 approach, we speak to the press. We do a number of different things. That's part of the democratic process of engaging and speaking to the public and winning them over, trying to convince them of arguments they may not agree with, which is why you need free expression as well as the freedom to protest. So I think it's really important to have freedom to protest, but this, where you have law breaking, which is purposely just to disrupt things, whether it's stopping people going to work or enjoying sport, without trying to convince them, you see, they think they've got the moral high ground. They think this has just got to be done now because we've got to stop all farming and all use of animals in any way, and they're not trying to actually convince people of the virtue of their argument, and that is really, I think, a really big problem.
Their argument is, of course, they say that it's inhumane to ask animals to jump over those very big fences and
the number of horses die every year, don't they?
Well, yes, they do, yes.
And in the wild, lots of things die all the time, and we get killed and everything. So I think sometimes there's an anthropomorphism. We sort of take the view of what we think about humans and impose them on animals and think, do we, you know, treat them in the same way? And I think that that's a big discussion that we could all have about what we think about that. But again, is it we're going to do it in a democratic way, which is engaging, or are we going to continue to allow and see people who think they can just destroy property and disrupt things, not trying to win people over, and actually the majority of people in Britain don't agree with them, right? And that would be the thing, that would be our starting point for me if I had their view. How do I go and convince them rather than do things like this?
What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one because, you know, as like you, I'm a strict vegetarian, but then people say to us, well, what would happen to all these farm animals? What would happen to all the cows and the geese and all the pigs and everything if we didn't farm them and eat them? And, you know, so you do find yourself kind of coming up against these arguments where you don't really have an answer. I do worry about the Grand National. I do think that, you know, the horses are put under a lot of pressure, unnatural. It's not like running in the fields or, you know, yes, they would die anyway.
They do like jumping.
They like jumping, okay. I don't want to see them hurt. I don't want to see them,
Nobody does.
you know, put down or anything like that. No, none of us do. So I can see their point, but like Extinction Rebellion, absolutely I can see their point about the planet, but it's the way you go about it. And I think that Alan makes a really good point about that.
I just don't see why people can't be. I've been a very strict vegetarian for 45 years nearly,
Yeah.
right? But I'm not against meat eating.
Neither am I, for other people.
For other people.
I'm completely open-minded if they want to.
This is my decision.
Yeah.
This is what I do. But I'm not, you know, if you want
But we're
to
not
eat
militant
meat,
about it.
But I think even people who eat meat want to know that the meat has been raised humanely.
Oh, yeah, but that's
and
a
that
good
cruelty is not involved in it. And I think
I think there's a huge amount of guilt around eating meat. Every single meat eater or regular eater that I know, when you say you're a vegetarian, they say, I barely eat any meat at all.
Yeah.
I only eat white chicken. I only have a bit of fish. I don't care. I'm genuinely not lecturing you. But they always say that.
Yeah,
It's
they
just
do.
funny.
Anyway, don't be guilty about if you want to eat meat. Don't feel
Yeah,
guilty about it. Enjoy it. Because I'm from a farming background as well, so it's
Yeah.
like you don't want to do anything against the farmers. That's for sure.
No.
Emma.
Yeah, this is worrying. Isn't
Emma,
it?
you're on the front page of the Observer with.
I seem to
very
have all
worrying
the
story.
sad stories
Yes.
this
You
morning.
do.
Yeah, this is an Observer investigation that's found that many foster children and children that have been going into care are being sent hundreds of miles from their hometown, from where they were, in order to be put into care because there simply isn't the provision. So children being sent up to 250 miles from London, so London children. And of course what this means is that they don't have, okay, they're being removed from their families for whatever reason because they need to be, but they are then removed from their schools, from their friends, from their local areas, from the places, you know, clubs and activities that are key to their own kind of social lives and survival, especially at such a kind of vulnerable time. Children are being sent as far as Perth, Glasgow, Leeds, Carlisle, who come from London and almost ending up in places that they literally know no one. So
No
this
wonder
is
they.
really.
There is a problem with some foster children becoming disruptive and things, isn't there?
But also being vulnerable and being exploited
but
when
no
they.
wonder.
Yeah.
With all of it.
Exactly, and the upheaval for them, emotionally and socially.
I don't know
at such a vulnerable time.
why do we not, Alan, have a better care system? Why do we not have a system that is looking after these? I mean, these are children who need absolute support.
Absolutely. I mean, the most vulnerable sections in society, and they are then placed in a dangerous situation, and we've seen the issues with grooming gangs and things like that, and a lot of people have not really wanted to address those things, but really problematic. I do think that it's slightly ironic that the Observer and the Guardian run this piece after having had 3 years where we've seen real big impositions, and one of those was the vaccine mandate, which was imposed, that the care workers across all parts of social care had to have or leave, and we lost over 40,000 of them. So the lack of staff, over 165,000 in social care and beyond that, partly is contributed to as a consequence of that. Now, it didn't happen for the rest of the NHS because many people challenged it and the government did a U-turn. But again, like with considering the implications of things, we have to think about staffing and resource. But these measures, we've still got over 40,000 people who worked at the front line who've had a lot of experience that were just lost as a consequence.
Can't they go back now?
Well, I think partially. Firstly, some of them have tried to go back, and in some interviews, because they were lost as a consequence of that, they found problems. We've got a campaign actually says that there should be apology to them, but also reinstate and compensate them. We do know that care workers are not paid particularly good money. There is a discussion about how that could get resolved as well. I think this is part of a discussion about care and the NHS across society. And there are some models. You said, how could it be done differently in like Bevan and everything? In Europe, there are some models where you have a fusion of different things, but that's about having a public debate and making sure we're at the heart of that, about what we need and what we think.
Once again, it's the vulnerable, the youngest, and the oldest in our society that are just being shortchanged.
Yeah.
If you work in care in early years, or in geriatric care, palliative care, caring in a care home for elderly people, or if you work with vulnerable young people, you're absolutely on the scrap heap. You're not valued by this country, and I do not understand why we don't pay those workers. It's the hardest work, looking after babies and looking after elderly people, dying people, vulnerable children.
Yeah.
These are the people that we need to be paying well to do a really important job.
I think the fact that we don't pay carers enough for whoever they're looking after, and particularly the vast army of nearly 5 million properly unpaid
carers, yeah.
I think it's a national disgrace. But it's interesting because you pick up a story on the front page of the Telegraph, again involving children and again involving a lack of service for them.
Indeed, and so what we've seen is that the impacts of on children in particular of lockdown in the last period has meant that everything from social distancing to not being in education, the most vulnerable of them in terms of speech therapy, development psychologically, has been limited and held back and has had big consequences. And some of them have been waiting over a year to get service within the NHS, which frankly, a lot of the different societies, paediatrics and others have all commented on it, but this is a real travesty that not only that during the period of lockdowns, which were very egregious and were very unprecedented, and many argued against them at the time, but that our youngest generation have been so impacted and harmed by that. So this is a concern. They've been deprioritised by the NHS. Following on from what we've just said, really, these are, we have a debt both to the oldest in society and to the youngest to give a lead and show them and treat them and actually provide a foundation for them in their early years. And this is doing the opposite.
What do you think, Emma? I mean, there are inevitably going to be consequences from what we went through.
Yeah. And having a couple of years not in school, not surrounded by your peers, by your just doing normal social life. I mean, we've covered on this show in recent weeks, the suicide of young people who are just simply terrified of the world from what they went through. It's absolutely devastating. I'm worried about the impact. I've got a 2-year-old. I'm worried about the impact on babies, lockdown babies that were never surrounded by other babies. Mm-hmm. Most of them seem to have recovered, but it's not a normal way to spend the first few years of your life, to be in lockdown, in isolation, and or surrounded by people in masks.
Yeah, what's the alternative?
Well, we had to go through what we went through, but we're only now finding out the truth of what the decisions were behind that. I'm trying to be polite here and not to get too angry at this time in the morning.
Yes,
Emma,
no, don't get angry.
Don't get angry.
I won't. Sunshine. Look, we've got sunshine and bunnies.
Yes. Before we get to the sunshine and the bunnies, Emma, The Crown are apparently filming the Kate and William love story.
Yeah, this is a cheery story. Although I'm not watching The Crown. But anyway, the Netflix drama, they're bringing the love story, they're bringing the royal story into the 21st century, which is going to be interesting, isn't it? They're sort of filming at the moment, I think, between the 1990s and the early 2000s. So they've been filming in St Andrews, and they've got lovely photographs of a sort of rainy film set. This is the love story of Wills and Kate, and they apparently first locked eyes while jogging.
Oh, yes.
Doesn't surprise me, actually, the two of them.
Says who?
And they've got scenes of Kate waitressing in an Italian restaurant, which apparently she really did. So I think maybe I'll tune in for this instalment. Well, I want to see a bit of a love story. I want to see
She's a romantic.
how it all happened. A 19-year-old actress looking absolutely gorgeous in the rain, of course.
I tell you what, this fella, whoever, I don't know who he is.
I don't know who either of them are. Up and coming.
What do you want me on? 9. Look at that. This fella, and it's not that he necessarily looks exactly like William, but just the way he's holding his mouth, his teeth, all that. It's just there's something.
There's something about. Yeah.
There is something about it. I wonder if is he a good actor or is he just a lucky?
I don't know anything about him. I think it's lovely that
Ed McVeigh is called.
two up-and-coming getting the chance. I think the Crown has been quite good with that. They've had quite a few people that aren't big names that have sort of, made their name on the Crown.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Oh, interesting.
And nice to have a sort of happy royal love story rather than the sort of slightly difficult one from California, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, you alluded to it, but Alan has actually got the front page. The temperature to reach 24 degrees over the bank holiday
I
weekend.
don't know if I believe it.
It's exciting. It's good. It's what everyone's been waiting for. We've
really.
had a myriad of bad weather, which has had consequences, of course, we know. There's been flooding and there's been some real problems. Some people have missed flights. They've been held up. I mean, I do think we have an issue with some of our services and logistics. If you go to some places like New York and elsewhere, they'll have thick snow and they can clear it all and everything. And sometimes we have a little bit in our infrastructure and everything shuts down. We do need to address that. But
A little bit.
It's
Complete,
great
your
news.
transport system completely broken.
Yes, indeed. But it is really good news because both anyone who wants to be out with a family or gardening or doing other things. I'm a cold water swimmer, so I actually quite like the cold, but this is going to be good news for everyone.
Yeah, but your Easter eggs are going to melt.
Put them in the fridge. I don't care about that. Let's have some hot weather. Come on, this country's ready. We've had so much rain. It's been a long old March. It was a very long January. It's been a long winter. I think this country is so ready for some sunshine.
Well, it is. I tell you what, if nothing else, it will lift our spirits
yeah.
as a nation, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm
Mentally,
fed
I
up of
think.
driving home in the rain.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just so depressing.
And also, isn't it wonderful when people are going away and you think, well, we don't need to go away,
We
really?
can stay at home and enjoy the sunshine.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, we've enjoyed your newspaper reviews. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll be seeing you again at least twice in the programme before we have to say good morning to you.